Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. The news spread across Port Charles like a spark catching dry brush, first a whisper, then a rumor, and finally the explosive confirmation that no one saw coming. Anna Devane had returned to town with Spencer Cassadine at her side, alive, shaken, and carrying 1,000 unspoken truths behind his eyes. For months, Port Charles had lived with the crushing assumption that Spencer was dead, lost forever to the dark waters off Paris after the Cassadine mess spiraled into tragedy. Even Laura, who had clung to hope with the desperate strength of a mother who has already buried too many relatives, had finally begun to accept the unbearable. Yet fate, stealth, and sheer Cassadine's stubbornness had woven a different ending, one only Anna could have delivered. It all started with a classified lead she received while completing quiet intelligence work overseas, a whisper tucked between lines of encrypted reports suggesting that a young man matching Spencer's description had been spotted alive, injured, and held under circumstances too suspicious to ignore. Anna, carrying both guilt and instinct sharper than any blade, followed the trail into a den of dangerous players who had exploited the chaos following Victor's fallout, using Spencer as leverage, a bargaining chip, or perhaps a ghost kept in the shadows for reasons yet unknown. When she finally found him, gaunt but defiant, his spirit flickering between desperation and hope, she made the decision instantly: no paperwork, no permission, no hesitation. She would bring him home. Their journey back to Port Charles had been a quietly charged one, Spencer asking for Trina almost immediately, his pain raw every time her name crossed his lips. He carried regrets heavier than the injuries he had suffered, months stolen from him, months he feared she had spent grieving him, months he could never give back. Anna, watching him battle the weight of everything he had missed, said little, knowing Spencer needed silence more than speeches. She simply assured him that returning was the right choice, that the truth, however shattering, was always better faced than buried. But even Anna didn't fully grasp the emotional earthquake waiting when they stepped into the quiet of the mayor's office. Laura Collins, reviewing mundane city paperwork, looked up expecting staff, not miracles. At first, she froze, blinking, unable to separate reality from imagination. Spencer stood in the doorway like a figure torn from memory, and for several heart-stopping seconds the world seemed to slow. Laura's breath caught, her knees nearly buckling as the tidal wave of shock, joy, disbelief, and grief surged through her all at once. Then she moved, first a step, then another, until she was gripping her grandson's face, touching him as though afraid he might vanish again. Her questions tumbled out, broken by tears. How? Where? Why didn't he call? Was he hurt? Did he suffer? Did he know how close she'd come to losing herself in the void he left behind? Spencer, voice rough, told her he didn't call because he couldn't, didn't come home because he wasn't allowed to, didn't stop fighting because she had raised him with a spine of steel. Laura, overwhelmed, pulled him into the kind of embrace that made time irrelevant. Anna watched quietly, letting them have the moment that had been denied to them for too long. But relief lasted only as long as Laura could hold her grandson. When she finally pulled back, the questions sharpened, becoming the practical, urgent, protective concerns of a woman who has danced with danger too many times. She asked Anna for the full story, demanded to know who was responsible, what games were still being played, and whether Spencer was safe now, or if this resurrection would cost them something even greater. Anna explained only what she could, leaving out classified details but making one thing absolutely clear: Spencer had been held against his will, the threat had been real, and the people behind it were still moving in the shadows. Laura's shock deepened into simmering outrage, a familiar fire igniting behind her eyes. The Cassadines had paid in blood and betrayal for generations, yet somehow, someone always found a new way to drag the family back into darkness. She vowed then and there that no one, would steal another day from Spencer. Her relief did not erase her fury, it sharpened it. Spencer, seeing her fire, managed a weak smile, telling her that she shouldn't go to war on his behalf. But Laura reminded him that family was worth going to war for, especially when fate had given them a second chance. Yet even amidst the emotional reunion, a tension lingered in Spencer, something Anna had noticed on the flight home. He kept touching his chest or curling his hand into a fist, as though he held a secret that haunted him more than the ordeal itself. Laura saw it too, sensing immediately that her grandson was both here and not here, present yet carrying a weight he wasn't ready to set down. She asked him gently but firmly what he was holding back. Spencer hesitated, then the truth began to crack through his calm facade. He confessed that he had spent every day in captivity thinking about Trina, that the fear of never seeing her again had broken him more than the walls that held him. But the deeper truth, the one he struggled to voice, was that he didn't know where she stood now. Did she move on? Did she hate him? Did she even want him back after surviving the grief of losing him? Laura, heart-aching, told him that love like theirs doesn't burn out, it waits, sometimes painfully. But Anna, with a sharper edge, reminded Spencer that Trina had suffered deeply, and his return would reopen wounds she had barely begun to heal. He needed to be honest, patient, and prepared for the emotional chaos he was about to unleash. Spencer nodded, absorbing the weight of it. But before he could say more, Kevin entered the office, and the stunned psychologist froze at the sight of his stepson standing alive. The chain of emotional explosions continued, shock, disbelief, and sorrow melting into relief as Kevin embraced Spencer, grateful for a miracle he never expected to witness. As the news spread among those closest, reactions rippled outward, some joyous, some complicated, and some immediately suspicious. Sonny Corinthos, hearing through his channels that Spencer was alive and Anna had brought him in, immediately questioned whether this resurrection was tied to larger threats brewing beneath Port Charles. Sonny respected Anna, but he knew too well that no Cassadine miracle arrived without strings. Alexis, upon hearing the news, felt both gratitude and dread, knowing that Cassadine history never stayed quiet for long. Even Nicholas, wherever he was hiding, whatever he had become, would eventually learn his son had returned, and the fallout would be seismic. Yet none of those questions mattered as much as what awaited Spencer next, facing Trina. He asked Anna, quietly, if she had seen her, if she had any idea how Trina had been coping. Anna didn't sugarcoat it. She told him the truth, that Trina had been grieving, angry, heartbroken, but fighting to rebuild her life. That she had honored his memory but had carried the kind of pain that changes a person. She warned him that his return would bring joy but also confusion, conflict, and perhaps even resentment for the months of agony she endured. Spencer swallowed hard, his chest tightening with guilt he couldn't avoid. But he also felt a spark of hope, tiny but alive. As Laura placed a hand on his shoulder and told him she would support him every step of the way, Spencer felt something he hadn't felt since Paris, strength. His resurrection was only the beginning. Port Charles would react, alliances would shift, old enemies would take interest, and buried secrets would claw their way to the surface. Spencer's return would change everything, from Trina's healing to Laura's political peace, from Nicholas's eventual comeback to the darker forces waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. But for now, in this fragile breath between past suffering and future chaos, Spencer Cassadine stood alive in the place he belonged, surrounded by the family who had mourned him, protected by the woman who had risked everything to save him, and destined to shake Port Charles to its core. And as Anna watched the Cassadines reunite, broken, rebuilding, but undeniably resilient, she knew one thing for certain: bringing Spencer home was only the first chapter of a much bigger story, one that none of them were prepared for, but all of them would have to face together. In the hours following Spencer's return, Port Charles seemed to vibrate with a strange combination of hope, disbelief, and the uneasy tension that always came when fate bent the laws of life and death yet again. And though Laura tried to keep him shielded inside the mayor's office, the reality was that a miracle of this size could never stay quiet for long. Word was beginning to ripple through the hospital halls, police precincts, Windmere's lingering shadows, and even the metro courts. Polished floors as if the city itself sensed a Cassadine storm rolling back into existence, and Spencer, despite being exhausted to the point his hands occasionally shook, insisted he needed to walk, to breathe Port Charles air, to remind himself that the world he belonged to was real and not another hallucination from captivity. Anna stayed beside him as they moved through the building, her protective instincts humming like an alarm she couldn't shut off, but she also understood that Spencer needed space to reconnect with the life that had been stolen from him. He paused at the lobby window, staring at the Elm Street pier in the distance, remembering afternoons spent with Trina, arguments with Esme, Moments of grief and triumph that suddenly felt both razor-sharp and impossibly distant. She used to love walking that pier, he murmured, almost to himself, and Anna, sensing his emotional fracture, reminded him gently that grief doesn't erase love, but love doesn't erase grief either, and if he wanted any hope of rebuilding something with Trina he needed to face both sides of that truth. Spencer nodded, though his eyes burned with fear of hurting her again, fear of rejection, fear that she had finally learned to live without him. Back upstairs, Laura was already pacing, her mind racing ahead into territory Anna expected from her, logistics, threats, political fallout, and, inevitably, the Cassadine curse that never failed to reattach itself at the worst possible moment. She knew in her bones that Spencer's reappearance would not simply be a joyous reunion but a catalyst. Too many players moved in silence, too many motives lay hidden beneath layers of deception and opportunism. When Kevin returned with medical supplies to examine Spencer, Laura hovered so protectively that he eventually placed a hand on her shoulder and reminded her gently that Spencer needed calm, not interrogation. The physical examination revealed what Anna already suspected: malnutrition, bruised ribs, mildly reopened injuries from a failed escape attempt Spencer tried weeks earlier, and a psychological toll that Kevin recognized as severe trauma masked behind Cassadine bravado. But Spencer brushed off concern, insisting he had survived worse and that what he needed more than doctors was to see Trina. Yet each time he said her name his eyes darkened with guilt, each syllable a reminder that his disappearance hadn't only broken him, it had shattered her. Kevin, recognizing the emotional urgency consuming Spencer, advised that any reunion should happen carefully, in a controlled environment where neither would feel blindsided or overwhelmed, but Spencer rejected the idea instantly. "She deserves the truth without preparation," he said, voice cracking. "She deserves me to show up for her the way I should have from the beginning." Meanwhile, in another part of Port Charles, Trina Robinson was standing in the gallery, adjusting lights for an upcoming student showcase, unaware that the axis of her life was tilting. She had grown quieter since Spencer's disappearance, still passionate, still driven, but carrying pain like a shadow that followed her even in her brightest moments. Curtis, who had arrived to help her move canvases, noticed she was distracted and gently asked if she wanted to talk about whatever was weighing on her. Trina, wiping her hands on a cloth, admitted that the anniversary of Spencer's death was approaching and she hated that the grief still clung to her after months of trying to release it. "It's like he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way she rarely allowed anyone to hear. Curtis hugged her, telling her that healing wasn't linear and love didn't disappear just because life forced you to keep moving. Yet they both froze when Marshall entered holding his phone, saying he'd overheard something strange at the pier, people whispering about a Cassadine returning. Trina scoffed, assuming it was Nicholas drama resurfacing. Little did she know that the reason her heart suddenly began pounding was because some part of her soul already sensed the truth. Back at the mayor's office, Anna's phone buzzed, a coded message from a WSB contact confirming that the individuals responsible for Spencer's captivity had begun moving assets, as if preparing for exposure or retaliation. The threat wasn't over. In fact, Spencer's escape may have triggered the next phase. Anna concealed the message, not wanting to ignite Laura's panic, but Spencer noticed the tension in her expression. "They're coming after me, aren't they?" he asked quietly. Anna didn't lie. She told him yes, but he wasn't the only target. Anyone tied to the Cassadine fallout, including Trina, could be in danger. That reality hit Spencer like a punch to the ribs. His fear for his own life had never been strong enough to break him, but fear for hers was enough to make his breath catch. He demanded to know who these people were, what they wanted, and why he had been the one taken. Anna explained that remnants of Victor's network had splintered into factions, some seeking revenge, others seeking leverage over Cassadine assets, and one faction in particular known for trafficking intelligence targets had seized Spencer, believing he held access to information Nicholas once controlled. "They never believed me when I said I knew nothing," Spencer said bitterly. "Torture rarely waits for truth," Anna replied softly. As Kevin and Laura urged him to rest, Spencer pushed himself to his feet, refusing to hide. "If they're coming, then being passive is exactly what they want," he argued. Laura grabbed his arm, her voice fierce, reminding him that survival was not weakness but strategy. But Spencer's Cassadine blood boiled with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. He insisted he had to warn Trina personally before anyone else did. Anna considered stopping him, but she knew that denying this reunion would only worsen his emotional instability. Instead, she offered to accompany him, ensuring no one lurking in the shadows would use the moment to strike. Laura wanted to come too, but Spencer begged her to let him do this on his own. "Please, grandmother. I need her to see me, not the mayor's grandson surrounded by guards." Laura reluctantly agreed, though her heart clenched. The walk from City Hall to the gallery felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Spencer, climbing the steps one at a time, felt his pulse racing, each movement sending a jolt of fear and hope spiraling through him until his knees nearly buckled. Anna stayed several paces behind, giving him the illusion of solitude but ready to intervene. As he approached the gallery doors, he hesitated, gripping the handle as if it anchored him to reality. Through the glass he saw Trina adjusting a frame, her profile illuminated by the warm lights she loved directing so meticulously. The sight of her, alive, beautiful, stronger than he remembered, hit him with such force that tears blurred his vision. His breath hitched. For a moment, he feared he would break completely. Inside, Trina sensed movement and turned just as Spencer stepped through the doorway. Time fractured. The cloth she was holding slipped from her fingers. Her heart stopped, her eyes widened, and every cell in her body froze as she stared at the man she had mourned, dreamed about, cried for, screamed over, the man she had buried. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared as if her brain could not reconcile what her eyes saw. Spencer whispered her name, his voice cracking painfully. Trina staggered backward, one hand covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes faster than she could blink them away. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, "no, this isn't real." Spencer took a cautious step forward, holding up his hands the way someone might approach something delicate and sacred. "It's me," he said, voice barely audible. "I'm here. I'm alive." Trina let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, collapsing into a chair as emotions crushed her, relief, anger, disbelief, joy, abandonment, love, all colliding with unbearable intensity. Spencer knelt in front of her, terrified to touch her but unable to look away. She finally reached out, grabbing his wrist, needing proof, needing warmth, needing to feel that he wasn't a ghost born of grief. When her fingers met his skin, and he didn't vanish, she burst into sobs that shook her entire body. Spencer, unable to restrain himself, wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her shoulder as tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry," he kept repeating. "I'm so sorry, Trina. I wanted to come home. I tried. I never wanted to leave you. You were the only thing that kept me alive." She punched his chest, not hard but desperate, saying through tears, "How could you let me think you were dead? How could you leave me in that darkness alone?" Spencer held her tightly, letting her anger, her love, her grief pour out. He told her everything, how he had been taken, how he had fought, how every day without her felt like drowning. Anna watched from the doorway, her heart heavy but hopeful. This was not a clean reunion. This was a collision of souls wounded by time, loss, and love. And yet, even in their pain, she saw something unbreakable between them. But danger still loomed, closing in on Port Charles. Anna stepped outside to make a coded call, unaware that across the street, a shadowy figure was watching Spencer and Trina through the glass, reporting their every move into a burner phone. "Target confirmed," the voice muttered coldly. "Phase 2 begins tonight." Port Charles had gotten Spencer back, but at a cost none of them yet understood. And as night settled over the harbor, something darker was arriving with it. The miracle of Spencer's return was only the spark. The fire had not yet begun. But the moment Spencer and Trina clung to each other, shaking, crying, breathing the same air for the first time since fate tore them apart, another shift began moving beneath Port Charles, subtle but dangerous, like a tremor warning of a coming quake. Trina finally pulled back enough to look into his eyes, searching them for truth, for pain, for any fragment that proved he was really here. You came back to me, she whispered, still trembling. Spencer cupped her face, brushing away a tear. I never stopped trying, he answered, voice thick. Every night, every hour, every second, I fought because I needed to get back to you. Her breath shuddered, and the anger she tried to hold on to dissolved into something softer, something wounded but hopeful. Anna, sensing the emotional storm settling just long enough for them to breathe, stepped forward to let them know Laura and Kevin were waiting nearby, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed with an encrypted alert. Her pupils narrowed. Spencer, we need to move, she said tightly. Spencer stiffened immediately, his instincts preemptively bracing. Trina, noticing the shift, clutched his arm. What's going on? Anna's jaw clenched. Someone knows you're here. Someone who shouldn't. That was when a soft crack echoed from outside, too sharp to be a car door, too subtle to be dismissed. Anna reacted instantly, pushing Spencer and Trina behind a pillar as she scanned the street. But the figure watching earlier was already gone, leaving only a chill in the air and the sense that their reunion had been silently marked. Spencer pulled Trina close, his voice trembling not from fear for himself, but for her. I won't let them take anything from us again, he whispered fiercely. Trina held him tighter, her heartbeat matching his.